It was just before midnight on a quiet summer night in Griffin, Georgia, when a tragic scene unfolded inside a small home on Sunnybrook Drive. A young man lay motionless on a mattress, a gunshot wound to his chest, blood soaking the sheets beneath him. Kneeling beside him was his girlfriend of 7 years, crying, shaking, and gasping for help. Outside, flashing lights pierced the darkness as first responders rushed through the doorway, met with a scene that made little sense. The distraught woman was hysterical, sobbing and repeating the same words, "It was an accident." Yet, nothing in that room appeared accidental. What began as a night of reconciliation had ended in chaos, bloodshed, and a death that would divide a courtroom, a community, and even the jury. This is not the story it first seemed to be. This is the case of Steven Freeman and Mary Catherine Higdon. Steven Freeman was born on January 1st, 1995, in Thomasville, Georgia. Shortly after, his family relocated to Griffin, where he would spend his formative years. Raised in a loving and tightly bonded household, his parents were deeply committed to providing the best foundation possible for Steven and his brother. Every effort was made to ensure the boys had what they needed, not just materially, but emotionally. Steven thrived in this nurturing environment, filled with happiness and well-liked by everyone who knew him. People naturally gravitated toward him. He was cheerful, optimistic, and always smiling. No matter the situation, he found reasons to be upbeat. The outdoors was where Steven truly came alive. Hiking, camping, hunting, and fishing weren't just hobbies. They were essential to who he was. He felt most at peace in nature, far from the noise of everyday life. His connection with his mother ran especially deep. When she decided to return to school to further her education, Steven was immensely proud. Her determination inspired him, and when she earned her diploma, he expressed that pride in a heartfelt letter, thanking her for everything she had done for him and his brother. In high school, Steven met Mary Catherine Higdon, a classmate 1 year older. Their connection was instant, and from the very beginning, they were inseparable. Their relationship deepened quickly, rooted in shared interests and a mutual appreciation for the outdoors. Mary Catherine enjoyed camping and often joined Steven and his friends on their excursions into the woods or fishing trips. She handled the rugged environment with confidence and was comfortable around firearms. Steven's friends welcomed her, seeing how happy she made him, and she became part of their inner circle. Mary Catherine had also grown up in a loving home. As a child, she loved being the center of attention, often singing and dancing for guests during family gatherings. Known for her high energy, creative spark, and deep affection for nature and animals, she and Steven decided to live together after graduating high school. Steven took a job with a roofing company, while Mary Catherine became a teaching assistant at a local kindergarten. By 2018, Steven was 23 and Mary Catherine was 24. They had already spent 7 years as a couple. Their relationship was not without challenges, as they had their disagreements and even a brief separation. But they always circled back to each other, reaffirming their desire to stay together. Over the years, their families became closely intertwined. Mary Catherine became a regular presence at Steven's family home, joining them for dinner every Sunday. Steven's mother grew very fond of her, seeing her almost like another daughter. Holidays were spent together as one extended family. However, it was on the night of August 1st, 2018, that everything changed. Just before 11 p.m., flashing lights lit up the street as an ambulance and police car pulled up to the residence. Moments earlier, emergency dispatchers had received a frantic call from a distraught Mary Catherine. She was crying uncontrollably, her voice shaking as she explained what had just happened. She claimed she had accidentally shot her boyfriend. Through her sobs, she described a scene of confusion, insisting she had only been trying to hand Steven a gun when something went wrong and the weapon fired. She maintained that she had no idea the gun was loaded. When paramedics and police entered the apartment, they found Steven on a mattress in the living room with Mary Catherine beside him, overcome with emotion. She was kneeling next to him, crying hysterically. Police officers tried to move her away so medics could work, but she resisted, refusing to leave Steven's side. She screamed that she couldn't lose him and was inconsolable. Steven was still alive, his pulse faint but present, and he was rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. Only after he had been transported were officers able to sit down and attempt to speak with Mary Catherine, but communication remained difficult. Between tears and broken phrases, she repeated her version of events, insisting it was an accident and that she never meant for it to happen. Mary Catherine claimed she hadn't even been pointing the gun in Steven's direction when it discharged unexpectedly, striking him in the chest just below the neck. Despite frantic efforts to save him, the damage was too severe, and shortly before midnight, Steven was pronounced dead at the hospital. However, officers at the scene couldn't ignore the inconsistencies in her account. Signs suggested that something more had occurred before the shooting. The kitchen was in disarray, with food scattered across the counters and floor as if someone had erupted in a moment of fury, throwing whatever they could grab. The mess suggested a violent argument had taken place. Officers also noticed the scent of alcohol on Mary Catherine's breath, and her speech was occasionally incoherent. Police made the decision to bring her in for questioning, and she did not resist, going voluntarily. At the station, she remained firm in her claims that it was an accident and that she had never meant to hurt Steven. He was her best friend, the love of her life, and she could never intentionally harm him. She explained that firearms had always been a shared interest between them, and hunting was one of their passions. They owned several guns, she said, but insisted that none were ever loaded. She was shocked when the weapon fired. As the interview continued, however, something slipped. At one point, Mary Catherine referred to the moment of the shooting with different language, saying, "When I threw the gun to Steven, it fired." This statement contradicted her earlier claim that she had tried to hand him the gun. Now she was describing something far more reckless, throwing a loaded firearm. For investigators, this was a turning point. They already knew Mary Catherine wasn't inexperienced. In addition to working at a kindergarten, she held a part-time job at a local gun shop. She wasn't just familiar with firearms, she was highly trained. She often told people that she knew more about guns than most, even more than Steven. As a shop employee, she was expected to understand every aspect of firearm safety. To trained officers, the idea that someone with that level of knowledge would throw a gun was unthinkable. It wasn't just dangerous, it defied common sense. No responsible person, let alone someone trained in weapons handling, would act that way. Detectives decided to change their approach and confronted her directly. They told her they didn't believe her story and accused her of lying, pointing to the evidence: the disorder in the kitchen, the smell of alcohol, and the inconsistencies in her account. As the tone shifted, Mary Catherine broke down in tears. According to investigators, in that emotional moment, she admitted the truth, that she had pulled the trigger in a fit of anger. It should have been a clear-cut confession, but it wasn't. The interrogation room's recording equipment had failed. Technically, the video feed was intact, but the audio was corrupted, a continuous noise drowning out every word. The moment Mary Catherine supposedly confessed to pulling the trigger could not be heard. Investigators were stunned. Their strongest evidence, her own words, was unusable. Yet they pressed forward. Mary Catherine was arrested and charged with murder. The prosecution believed there was still enough to move forward. They had physical evidence, motive, and inconsistencies in her story that, when combined, painted a troubling picture. Investigators emphasized that Mary Catherine knew exactly what she was doing with a firearm. She had handled countless weapons at the shop and had demonstrated her knowledge openly. In their view, her actions that night were not consistent with someone who made a simple mistake. Even the gun itself raised suspicions. It had grease in it, indicating preparation, not negligence or oversight. Then there was the dinner she had prepared earlier that night, Steven's favorite meal, roast beef. She had made his favorite dish, and then, sometime later, food was thrown across the kitchen, a gun was fired, and Steven Freeman was gone. Detectives expanded the investigation by speaking with people who knew the couple personally. What surfaced in those conversations shifted the case dramatically. Friends of Steven were quick to express their shock. None of them were surprised by what had happened. The moment they heard he had been shot, they all suspected Mary Catherine. It wasn't the first time she had pointed a firearm at him. Steven had spoken directly to his friends about it on multiple occasions. She had aimed a gun at him during their relationship. In the early years, they seemed perfectly matched, both outdoorsy and passionate about similar things. But over time, Mary Catherine's behavior became increasingly erratic. She grew possessive, emotionally volatile, and even physically aggressive. According to Steven's friends, she would scream at him in public and had shoved him in front of others. Their arguments weren't occasional. They were constant. It reached a point where Steven would routinely leave the apartment just to escape the tension. He blocked her number more than once, unable to find peace while she continued calling him nonstop. One co-worker testified that Mary Catherine had once called Steven 30 times before the workday had even begun, and this wasn't an isolated event. It was a pattern. On April 21, 2018, 3 months before he was killed, Steven sent a text to a friend stating that Mary Catherine was running around the apartment, screaming and threatening to shoot both herself and him. The fear escalated even further. A month later, in another message to a friend, Steven confessed something deeply troubling. Although Mary Catherine had pointed guns at him before, something about her behavior had changed. There was something in her eyes that scared him. For the first time, he truly believed she was capable of pulling the trigger. Eventually, he made a decision. He wanted out. He planned to leave the relationship and start over in another city. A friend had already agreed to share an apartment with him. Steven planned to collect his things while Mary Catherine was at work, quietly disappear, and never come back. His escape was scheduled for August 3rd, but he never made it to that date. He was shot on August 1st. Steven never filed an official police report regarding the earlier threats, yet during the investigation, records showed that law enforcement had been called to their residence 5 times in the past year, several of those calls for domestic disturbances. 2 days before the shooting, on July 30th, Steven and Mary Catherine were still exchanging loving text messages, wishing each other a good day and reaffirming their affection. But by July 31st, everything had shifted again. Another argument likely erupted. Steven didn't go home that night. Instead, he stayed at a friend's house, avoiding her completely. He ignored her calls and texts and even told his mother he wasn't going back. He had reached his limit. The next day, August 1st, Mary Catherine tried to reach him again. When there was still no answer, she cooked dinner, hoping that a familiar routine might bring him back. But Steven didn't respond, and still, he didn't come home. Frustrated and emotional, she reached out to Steven's mother, hoping to learn where he was. She was told that Steven had spent the night at his friend Thomas's place. Mary Catherine didn't wait. She got in her car and went out looking for him. On the road, she spotted Thomas's vehicle with Steven in the passenger seat. She followed them, pulled up alongside, rolled down the window, and began shouting, demanding to know whether Steven was coming home. He finally agreed, tired and defeated, trying to keep the peace. He got in the car with her, and 2 hours later, he was being rushed to the hospital. Then the trial began. Prosecutors set out to prove that Steven Freeman was not killed by accident. They alleged it was an act of rage. Their theory was that Mary Catherine had cooked his favorite dinner, but when he didn't come home, her anger boiled over. They presented physical evidence to support their case: greasy marks found on the gun and bloodstains located on the sheets. These stains were concentrated in one corner of the bed and surrounding area, suggesting Steven had been shot while sitting upright when the bullet hit, causing him to fall backward onto the mattress. One by one, friends, family, and co-workers took the stand, their testimony echoing the same message. Steven's relationship was toxic. The couple fought constantly, and Mary Catherine had threatened him before, often with a firearm. Her behavior was controlling, aggressive, and deeply troubling. The prosecution highlighted one especially damaging detail. Mary Catherine had altered or added to her account of events 6 separate times. Each version differed, sometimes slightly, sometimes drastically. To the jury, this raised doubts about her credibility and intent. As the courtroom doors opened for the trial of Mary Catherine Higdon, the narrative shifted once again. This time, she was not calling it an accident. Now she claimed she had acted in self-defense. Mary Catherine's legal team introduced a new version of events. Her attorney argued that the cheerful, beloved Steven Freeman that everyone else knew had a darker side, one that only Mary Catherine had seen. According to the defense, behind closed doors, Steven had been controlling, jealous, and violent. The attorney claimed that Steven dictated what Mary Catherine wore, what she ate, and how she behaved. He allegedly kept strict control over her spending and demanded to know her whereabouts at all times. Physical abuse, the defense said, was a regular occurrence. Mary Catherine accused Steven of striking her on the back of the head and once of kicking her so hard off their bed that her head hit the doorframe. To support these allegations, the defense introduced 63 pages of text messages, angry, profane, and at times threatening, that Steven had sent her a year earlier. These messages, retrieved from the memory of her old phone, came in the aftermath of a brief breakup, during which Mary Catherine had slept with one of Steven's friends. The betrayal, once discovered, had unleashed a barrage of vulgar and aggressive texts. Mary Catherine took the stand herself, tearfully describing life with Steven as one of constant tension. She claimed that she was made to prepare his clothes and shoes every morning, folded and set out in a particular way. The bathroom had to be perfectly prepared so he could walk in and take a warm shower. She told the court he routinely accused her of cheating and that arguments would quickly escalate. She said he had grabbed her wrists, shaken her, and even hit her. Her lawyer read excerpts from messages Steven had allegedly sent. "The more you say, the worse it will be for you when I get home." And, "I miss you too much. I'm coming home to you, and it could end badly for you. You might end up in the Red Room tonight." Mary Catherine explained that the Red Room referred not to a specific space, but to the nights when Steven would allegedly tie her up and hit her. Through sobs, she recounted 2 instances when she said Steven had forced himself on her, ignoring her protests and continuing without her consent. One of those incidents, she testified, occurred after a trip to Disneyland. Steven, she claimed, told her that since he had spent so much money on her during the trip, he deserved something in return. She said it was fear, not rage, that defined the events of August 1st. That night, she claimed she told Steven she no longer wanted to be with him. His response, according to her, was explosive. He began throwing the food she had cooked for him and shoved her. It was then, she claimed, that she grabbed the gun and told him to leave the apartment. Steven allegedly lunged at her, and within seconds, he was injured, telling her to call for help. She maintained that it all happened quickly, that she never intended to hurt him and certainly never to kill him. However, the timing of her new claims raised questions. At no point during police questioning had she mentioned that Steven lunged at her, nor had she ever spoken of his alleged violence. This, the prosecutor argued, was a major inconsistency. Why, he asked, had she not reported any of this abuse? Why were there no medical reports? Why were there no police complaints? Mary Catherine answered that she had been ashamed, believing the abuse was somehow her fault. She told the court that she thought if she just behaved better, maybe Steven wouldn't get so angry. As for the police interrogation, she claimed she had been too embarrassed to tell the truth about their relationship to the officers. But then came a surprise from the prosecution. Data pulled from Mary Catherine's phone browser revealed that just hours before the shooting, she had been visiting adult websites featuring violent and aggressive content. The timing raised eyebrows. These searches had been made while she was working a babysitting job, and Steven was nowhere nearby. The prosecutor questioned how someone claiming to be traumatized by abuse could engage with such content voluntarily. Mary Catherine insisted her motives were misunderstood, stating that she had searched for that material only to find ways to please Steven. she denied having any personal interest in it. The defense's strategy centered on portraying Mary Catherine as a battered woman. An expert witness took the stand to testify that her behavior was consistent with someone suffering from battered woman syndrome. However, the prosecution presented their own expert who argued the opposite, that Mary Catherine showed no such signs. Another point of contention arose when Mary Catherine claimed to have told Steven she wanted to end the relationship. Yet, on the day of the shooting, she had tried all day to reach him, prepared his favorite dinner, and when he didn't come home, she tracked him down at a friend's apartment and convinced him to return with her. The sequence of events suggested reconciliation, not confrontation. Critical evidence, however, remained unusable. The video of her police interrogation, in which she reportedly confessed, had no audible audio. Investigators had also mishandled the gun found next to Steven. Officers admitted they placed the firearm in a paper bag for safety, fearing Mary Catherine might harm herself, but they failed to document its original position. No photos were taken, and the reason they didn't remove Mary Catherine from the room remains unknown. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the courtroom braced for the verdict. Mary Catherine Higdon was acquitted on all charges. Several jurors later admitted that while they personally believed she may have committed the act, the prosecution had failed to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. They cited the flawed investigation, the missing confession, the undisciplined evidence handling, and the absence of Steven's phone data as key reasons for their decision. Without a complete picture of the relationship, they had only Mary Catherine's phone and her version of events to rely on. On June 26, 2019, Mary Catherine walked out of jail a free woman. For Steven Freeman's loved ones, the verdict was devastating. They believed justice had not been served. His mother, in particular, refused to stay silent. Since her son's death, she has become an advocate for domestic violence awareness, reminding the world that abuse does not always look the same, that victims can be women, but they can also be men. Violence, she says, knows no gender, and Steven Freeman's name is now part of that truth. Thanks for tuning in. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.